here, Man to Man podcast. Mick Pickett, Dennis Lemire, a little bit different. Mike usually is on, but usually in these podcast episodes, I like to softball a few things to get the conversation going, right? But you never allow me to do that in life, just to softball through some things. So here's where I'm going to go with it. You're a father, you're a realtor, you're a husband, you're a son. You're a board member at Man to Man, right? So when it's over, when Mick is done, when life is over, and you can sit down and read your obituary, right? I'll put it that way. Kind of cheesy, but you're sitting down and you're reading your obituary after you've passed. How do you want to be identified? What do you want them to have said? This is who Mick was. This is what Mick was.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Man, some of these things I've been hearing recently, which is kind of cool. There's a movie coming out tomorrow, and there's people talking about near-death experiences and some stuff. I've never really listened to much of that in my life, but recently just kind of been on my radar a little bit more, and kind of these stories that people have. And some of them that really stuck out to me was when they get to heaven and they're talking to who they believe is Jesus in this moment. One of the main questions is, did you learn to love? It makes my eyes well up even talking about it, because it's just like, it really puts into perspective instantly daily interactions. And the premise of it, how these stories continue, is just like, accolades mean nothing. In like a life review time, they're nothing. They're not even on there. They're not even acknowledged. What's acknowledged is your interactions with people. And what did you do with your life is what did you do with relationships and interactions with people. And not only like if I said something nice or hurtful to you and how that made you feel, but then you get to see also like how that made what you did with that, like to your kid or to somebody you came across next. And you see this whole butterfly effect of your interactions. And it really just brings into a focus of like, I want to spend today well and be intentional with people now. And keeping our eyes fixed on things above, meaning like, I'm going to be right here in this podcast. I don't know how this is going to affect you or anybody that listens to it. I don't know, but I'm going to believe that since I'm here, that it can make a really important thing happen for somebody.
Sure.
And so it's almost like training your brain out of the American culture of speed and hurry and actually focusing on what matters. And it just takes, for me, I'm in the middle of it. It's just taking practice, but I'm getting better each month of being intentional. And if God is with us, where 2 or 3 are gathered, then anything can happen.
Right.
For not just for us, but anybody that's around us too. So it's, how do I want to be remembered? It's just he loved well. I would like people to say he loved well. I felt seen around him.
That's good. And I think that one of the themes that Mike and I have been talking about a lot on the podcast, or some of the themes, they revolve around, like, what do I do next? I hear that constantly from guys. And I've asked it probably to you multiple times, right? Is I don't know what I do, where I go next, or what I should be doing next. I don't know what God wants for me next, right? And the crazy thing is if you change that in perspective of the world and you look at it from, he wants you to love others around you. The next is always here. There is no like God's got to speak to you and say, what I want you to do is go to the land of Canaan and do this and that. Like, no, the next could literally be the coffee shop that you're at, or the gas station that you go to, or the friend who calls, or maybe that you haven't called, right? And that comes up on your heart. Like, man, I really haven't talked to Sean in a while. I'm going to give him a call. Right. And actually doing that. Right. And letting yourself be led by those interactions is a huge thing. And so how do you give up? Like, give me some ideas from you and how it's working in your life how you give up the busy and the rush and because you've got 3 little kids, a wife, a house, a business, right? All this stuff. And so you can't ignore all of that because as a man, you have responsibility to provide for your wife and kids, to provide for your family. But at the same time, balance that out with loving your wife and kids and loving your family. And so, what does that balance look like in your life?
Yeah, that's a big one, probably for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a decision that has to be made. If you're reading the word and seeing, you're kind of deciding, what does God prioritize? What does God say is important? I know what I think is important.
Right.
And according to America and in my life, I'm putting different emphasis on certain things. But I'm reading the Bible and I'm going to choose. It starts in faith, and then you start to see that it was worth it afterwards. But it starts with, I'm going to choose to prioritize what God says is important over what I think is important. So it's surrendering a lot of my own understanding and a lot of my own personal experience, which is usually, that's all you have to use for your determinations on things.
Right.
So it's literally, I'm going to take all that, my life experience and all what I think, and I'm going to set it over here and say, God, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'm going to choose to believe that your ways are higher than my ways, and there's things that I don't understand. I want to implement what is valuable to you into my life. How do we go about that? And so what he's trained me in is just kind of different ways to give yourself reps, like repetitions throughout the day and it's basically just starting with inviting him in. Maybe it's easier for some people than others, but it's just inviting him into daily decision making to start. So I don't know if that answers like the part of the question.
Sure. Yep. I think that gives us a path. I think this is important because I just thought of it now and it definitely is something that I think in all relationship, it's come up in my head a couple times, but in talking to you, it feels like, oh my gosh, Mick has been doing this forever. This is a lifestyle that you've established over your whole life. And it's going to take me forever to catch up effectively. Right. The feeling of I'm always behind. But the reality is this has been a fairly recent journey for you in your life. I mean, how long have you been heading down this road and working in this mentality that you just explained?
Yeah. And that's a great call out about being behind. The enemy seems to come at you with whatever lie might get you,
right?
Whatever that one is for you, he tries to get you with that one. So I'm almost 39. I call myself a Christian, believed, never doubted that God existed. But when I was 33, right before I got married, the Lord led me to a moment of kind of going all in for the Lord of, I gotta make this my own. I gotta see if this is worth doing. I gotta do some due diligence for myself. So I just went for it, I guess, in that time.
So 6 years, basically.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Even though I've called myself a Christian my whole life, I was never living it out until I began this process 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that's where I felt like the Lord taught me this very simple prayer, which I think is really beneficial for anybody at any time, which is just, Lord, here I am. What do you want to work on in my heart or my mind next?
Right.
So even in that prayer, I'm setting aside, if you've got this issue with like pornography, or if you don't have a cushion in your bank account, or you have like all these things you're worried about, in that prayer, you're literally saying, I'm setting all that aside. I'm saying, what do you want to work on next in my heart, my mind? You see the whole picture. You know what led to all these knots and turmoil and trauma within me. What do you want to work on? I'm going to trust you that you know better than me. And I think when I started, I didn't know the goodness of God. So I think I had a little bit of an attitude. I was like, fine, God, whatever.
Almost in defiance, right?
Because I didn't know what he's going to do. I was like, fine, if I'm going to go full on here, then what's next?
Okay.
And one of the most amazing things that he led me to, which is just hilarious, because I'm about to get married. This is 2018. I've got all these not doing very well in my business yet. Intimidated, a lot of fear within me and everything. And I'm just like, all right, fine. What do you want to do next, Lord? He's like, you need to forgive your basketball coach for not playing you enough time. I'm like, how is that possibly relevant? How can that be relevant? That does not matter. I don't think about that. It wasn't like that big a deal in my life at all. But in that moment, it just clicked. I'm like, okay, your process is going to be different than my process.
Right.
I think I just understood. I was like, okay, it's going to be different than I think. So that softened me for the next 8 months of progression, because when a curveball came of like, that doesn't make sense, I understood that it's not going to make sense a lot.
Sure.
I was just like, okay, you got to forgive this person. You got to forgive yourself over here. You've got to like make amends here. And it was just like the Candyland board of like,
yeah.
And what the Lord showed me too is that he could show up right at that moment and just solve all my problems. But if he does that, I don't know him any better.
Sure.
And that comes back to like what he values. And he values the relationship between us more than anything else.
Right.
So he wants to create a lifestyle that helps you to go into a deeper relationship with him throughout, instead of just solving all your problems, because that doesn't solve your real problems.
Right. Right.
So I just began right then. It was just like, what's next? And, so yeah,
it's almost a perception readjustment, right? I mean, we feel like we as people, I think a lot of times, and mostly us, I'll say us as guys, right? As guys, we feel like whatever is on our plate at that moment is really important, right? I mean, this is, oh my gosh, this is important. I need to deal with this, right? And to God, he's like, yeah, I mean, it's important to you. Right. But man, I have such a bigger picture for you. I have such bigger plans for you. If you only knew what you could step into, this would seem very insignificant.
Right.
And so that perception adjustment that we have and we have to make, I mean, it's not easy, for one.
Right.
And it is totally counter to what we think, you know. But at the same time, once you just step into it, it doesn't, you know, I feel like it's like this cosmic, people want to experience like this cosmic peace, right? Like, oh, I stepped into this and now everything is great. Right. If you do that, you're going to feel the downfall of that too, because that's not accurate. Yeah. Everything's not great, but everything is manageable. Everything is you can navigate it. You have the ability. Yeah. It's still hard, frankly. Things are still hard sometimes. No question. But you have help and you have the ability to do it.
You start to have a hope starts to seep in. It's a new way. This doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like you've got your machete and you've got a bunch of trees and you're like, I can work through this.
Right.
It's not easy, but it's like at least you can kind of see the light and you're going to kind of go towards that. You don't get to know step 2 very often. He's just like, let's go to step 1.
Yeah. Somebody explained it in our men's group on Monday. He said, you know, he was using an analogy for something else, but he said, it's almost like you're going skydiving and you're up in the plane and the instructor looks at everybody in the plane and says, all right, so here's the deal. 50% of these parachutes are going to fail. So let's have a good time and make this happen. Right. And to a lot of people, they would be like, oh my gosh, I'm not jumping. Right. This is ridiculous. Why would I take those odds?
Yeah.
But to some of us, it would be like, well, we're here. We're going to have fun. Right. Like one way or another, this is going to be a good time. So, I mean, race you to the bottom kind of thing. Right. I mean, I think when you have that knowledge of not that God's going to give me a parachute that opens, because maybe he doesn't.
Right.
But he's going to be there waiting for me at the end. So either way, I'm okay. Right. Then suddenly it takes kind of the edge off of it, or the worry, again, not necessarily maybe in that specific scenario, but in general in life, a lot of times that's what life is like.
Right.
Like you don't know if this parachute's going to open.
That's a good way to put it.
So what do you do? Right. You can sit in the plane and you can never have any fun and you can never jump and you can never find out whether your chute would have opened or you get a real close encounter with Jesus. Yes. Right. But you can't live life like that. I mean, that makes it tough.
Yeah.
And this freedom that we live in to understand that in the end, God's going to be there to catch me one way or another.
Yeah.
It is sort of freeing.
Yeah. I think we just, whether you're a Christian, a new Christian or been a Christian for a while, it's like we all trust God a certain amount.
Mm-hmm.
And through these reps and getting shared experience with God and these, we grow almost we grow in trust with him. Almost a little analogy was just like a foster kid who had been through, let's say he's 12 and he's been through the foster system. It's been a super hard time, bouncing all around, tons of betrayal, tons of problems, abuse, all the worst things. And then somebody shows up, let's say in a nice car and a big suit, and is just like, and just breaks down. It's like, son, I've been looking for you. I want to be your dad so bad. I mean, I'll never let you down. I'm here forever. Mm-hmm. You get everything I have is yours. That kid in that time is going to say, that sounds pretty good, but I know how the world is.
Right.
I will trust you some small amount. I'll go with you, but I'm kind of going to be holding the reins. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a lot of times how Christian, at least that's how I was when I entered into the Christian faith. It wasn't until I finally said, I'm going to do it your way, that I started to give myself more repetitions, and he showed up. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, I can trust this guy a little bit more than I thought. Oh, I can trust him a little bit more. So the last 5 years has just been like a growing in trust with God. And, sure. And eventually there's like a tipping point moment where you're just like, this is the easiest choice ever. Like, he's unbelievably trustworthy. It's the most obvious thing ever afterwards. Right. But it's like a lot of faith steps beforehand.
Right. So, what you just brought up is, I think to have a podcast and not with Mick and not talk about this is like, everyone would stone me. Right. So all the guys that we know. So, sonship.
Right.
It's, I think it was one of the first conversations that you and I may have had individually. And it's something that has really been sort of a pillar of, Mick's life ministry, if I can put it that way. That seems very grandiose, but I think we all have some sort of thing that catches us, that really draws our attention. I'll say a part of God, right? That really we attach to and go, hey, this is key in my life.
Right.
And sonship has been that for you, right? And John Eldredge, it's a whole section in the basic retreat, becoming a king. It's a whole chapter in the book from Morgan Snyder. Jesus himself, right, referred to himself as son and referred to God as father, and in a way that was abnormal at the time, right? I talked to a lot of people that are like, well, if you look at that in how it was in context, I'm like, yeah, but Jesus kind of blew all that up. Mm-hmm. He was like, yeah, hey, here's all the stuff that you've been looking at in the context of history in the Jewish tradition. And then here's how you should be looking at it. I had to come all the way down here and tell you this, right? And one of those things was the idea of God as Father and Jesus as Son, and living in that. And that's something that you have really grabbed onto. And so, maybe we spend the rest of our time here. I think it would be a good one, at least, or part of it here, to kind of unpack that a little bit. So, what did this idea of sonship, how did you come into it at first? And what was the first time you can remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is kind of a key to a lot here in my faith?
Right. A couple of things to start off there is that identity seems to be the lens that you see the world through, and almost the way that you process information based on your what are you most deeply connected to. Mm-hmm. So Jesus' identity, according to him, was a son.
Right.
He valued his relationship with the Father more than anything else. That seemed to take priority over everything else, over his agenda, over what he had to do, where he had to go. That seemed to be the most important thing to him, according to the Bible. So I kind of knew that, but I didn't have any teaching on it or anything like that. I'd maybe seen the word sonship in the Bible a few times, but I've been like, yeah, we're adopted into the family of God. Okay.
Right.
It wasn't real in my heart, but it was okay. 2018, after I had that all-in moment, I went on like an 8-month journey of, I would call it sanctification, or just was very internal, working on things. And the Lord was like making space in my heart. Like, forgive your basketball coach. Right. He's a tiny little like a little rock. Like, you have a cup filled with a bunch of different sized rocks that are like trauma or unforgiveness or bitterness or anger or whatever. And through this process, the Lord was like removing each rock one at a time, or like a ball of yarn that is like, we've each got a ball of yarn in our heart, and we think, I'll just pull this string and it's gonna unravel itself, and we do, and it gets tighter and worse.
Right.
And the Lord just knows how to brilliantly, elegantly, and efficiently. Holy Spirit's the most efficient being ever.
Right.
He knows just what to pull, so it just unravels. And I got to kind of an end of that season. It's never ending, but a specific season there where it's like he had cleared out everything that he wanted to clear out at that time. And I was feeling the most free I'd ever been. I didn't know that level of freedom existed in Christianity. You could have told me years before, oh, you can be so free if you go through this process. I'm like, no, you can't.
Right.
You just don't, until you've tasted it, it's hard to believe that it exists. But I was experiencing so much level of freedom, like month after month, all of 2018. And so I made all this space in my heart, and I only have language for this now looking back.
Sure.
At the time, I was just, what do you want to do next, Lord? He'd created a lot of space. And then my dad had sent me a book called Sonship, A Journey into Father's Heart. And my dad had never sent me a book before. And he just thought really strongly, he's like, I think you're supposed to read this. And I did what I do all the time, which I think is a good process, which is, Lord, I consecrate this book to you. I ask you to nudge me when it's time to read it. Because everyone's giving you podcast books and all this stuff all the time. It's like, I only want to take in information when it's going to be efficient, like when the time is right for it. It's not just some stressful duty. I've got to get through this book. So anyways, I put it on the shelf for like 2 months, and I was just experiencing so much freedom of approval and approval of man and all this other stuff. And it was just an amazing season. And then I started reading this book in probably October 2018. And it was just, the main thesis of the book is called The Revelation of the Father's Love. And the book was really introducing me to the Father. It's basically Jesus introducing me to the Father through just like understanding and starting to see. I think I had a relationship with Jesus and the Holy Spirit, but the Father was just a little bit distant. He wasn't connecting to my heart well. And so this book really helped. And so it's like I created all this space the 8 months before. And then while reading this and understanding it, it's like the Father's love got dumped into that space. And it just like really, it hit home. There's just something about like a father's love for humans that just does something differently.
Right.
And I'm still new in this type of stuff. It makes my eyes well up just thinking about 5 years later. It's right on the surface. It's so real. Jesus's love as a savior and a king and a brother, friend, that's one thing.
Right.
But a father's love is just, it lands in the design of a human differently for some reason. And it's just true. And I started to understand that. So I started to be able to have conversations with the Father that I hadn't had before. It was always with Jesus or the Holy Spirit or whatever. I started to learn what he was like as Father, which was just a new look at Christianity. So that's it.
So what, I feel like there's aspects of, this is maybe getting a little deeper and then the surface level stuff but there's aspects of God, there are by design. I mean, God is, obviously God, the Trinity itself is an expression of God saying, hey, I'm more than you think I am. I can be three things and one all at the same time. And right in there, our brains go, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? And God goes, exactly. and that's the point, is that maybe it's not supposed to make all of the sense right away. Like other things, we could say this is a cup, it's full of water or coffee or whatever, right? Okay, that makes sense to me. I can process that through my experience and know when I drink this what I'm expecting. Yeah. When God says I'm three things, but one, all in relationship with each other and all in relationship with you, our brain goes, nope, don't understand that, right? So it takes a process for us to begin to understand that and to begin to interact with that. And what I've noticed is that in my life is that, there are different aspects of God that I experience while walking through some of these different things. When you introduced me to sonship, it was like that, like you said, it was this freedom of, holy crap, I don't have to perform. My dad's not looking for me to perform for him to be his son. Maybe is to be some of us may feel like, in our relationship with our fathers, where it gets a little bit wonky because they're not perfect, right? And they're not exhibiting the exact qualities that God is as a father. So they may be like, okay, as a basketball player, they're looking for you to perform in a certain way. Hey, you've got to work this hard and do this practice and shoot this good percentage and, work on your free throws and this and that and the other thing, right? God doesn't do that. Right. He has no wish for us to perform in any way. He just wants us to have a relationship with him. Right. Period. If we do that, that's what he wants. And so that's freedom. It's very freeing, and there is no, what do I do next? Because the answer might be hang out. Yeah. Nothing. Have a conversation with me. Maybe shut up and listen. Yeah. Right? I mean, how many times have we had that experience where, I'm just going to listen. Yeah. I'm going to go through a season of listening, and allowing God to unpack things. And so those attributes of God come up when you allow that to happen. It's a whole different side of God's personality or God's being, right? When you step into sonship. And so, in thinking of that, where does that progression go? So you said, at first it was, God, what do you have for me now? What do you want? Where do you want me? What do you have for me? And then it went into this exploration of, what does this mean to have God as a father and to really be a son underneath the protection and the guidance and all of the things that come from God as a father? And where has that gone, in the last 5 years? Where do you feel you are right now in all of that in terms of that relationship with God? Yeah.
I think it's in Becoming a King. I can't remember where the quote is, but it says that we are the sons of God, so we must become the sons of God.
Right.
So it's like, all right, we are. I don't know what that means, but I want to become it. So I already am. I'm already accepted. But there's things for us to do, and I think there's a maturity that he's inviting us into. Because just as a good father seeing the 5-year-old son, it's like, I see how much more capable you are than you think.
Right.
We don't know. We can't grasp it all. So we're just like, okay, what's next? I want to become who you created me to be. And it's not workspace. It's just, I'm trusting you. You're my dad and I'm trusting you.
Right.
And so it just leads you into just a nearness, I would say, with the Father. It becomes more real the more you look for it and invite that situation in. The thing that's really, as I've thought about this a lot, is I had no words for this and I learned articulation over time. It boils down to two things. It would be like two main ways of seeing life. And I would say it's the invitation for all humans to grow in. And it's, what is God really like? Mm-hmm. So Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Right. What is God really like? And what does God really think about me? I believe the way that wherever you're at in those two things is how you process information and how you live. Mm-hmm. And I think we can go deeper into both of those things. And as you do, you grow into this son that has this confidence that he has an inheritance and he knows who his father is and he knows what his father thinks about, what his father thinks about him. Mm-hmm. And I'm walking around now and there's no arrogance about it. It's just, I know who my father is.
Right.
So I've exchanged like the orphan mentality that I think we're all born into, where I've got to survive. I've got to make it. I've got to protect my stuff. I've got it.
Right.
And I've learned to exchange it that my father is trustworthy and I know what he thinks about me. So it's like, it doesn't matter if somebody comes in and tells me I'm bad at my job or this, or some other accusations come. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Right.
What's going on with you?
It's almost in my life where it's been almost like shocking, like the is that processing things through that lens, it leads to, gosh, sometimes I feel like it's almost, I want to say laziness, right? Because that's got a negative connotation, but like a peace that really, I mean, the Bible calls it peace, beyond understanding, right? And it really is what it is that at times people, I can tell, I can feel it from other people. They're like, why aren't you more worried about this? Right? why doesn't this bother you more? What are we going to do with this? And I'm like, I don't know. What are we going to do? Like, I don't have any ideas. And they're like, yeah. And so what, this is a problem. Maybe might be a problem.
Yes.
Maybe not. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer. So I'm just not going to panic.
Yeah.
I'm just going to sit in it for a while.
So that's somebody that you're just so secure in God's love. That's what that is. That's deeper than the situation that's happening around you, what people are saying or what's happening. On a heart level, you're secure. So you're processing information through that first, right, instead of through the circumstances first. So, I mean, that's been a process for you, and that's become the lens now, which is amazing, because that's where the peace comes from. Because it's just like, I know who my father is. Nobody thinks about me. Right. So there's some stuff going on. We're going to work through it.
Right. And I trust that one way or another, something will come out of it, and then we'll get an answer, and we'll go through that.
Yeah.
And it might take a while, and it might be painful, and there might be some doubt that comes up inside of you, right? And that's all normal.
Yeah.
And that's what you should kind of expect in this process.
Yeah. It's like the reality through this process, the reality of God increases in your day-to-day life and who he is for you and what he thinks of you. So when stuff comes up, it becomes the louder voice, is I know what God thinks about you. But that doesn't happen necessarily overnight. It's through shared experience and through like getting to know him, spending time with him, asking him what he's like. You get to know him like, well, yeah, all right. I know my father. That has to have been Jesus's mentality.
Right.
I think that with my poker background and a lot of psychological stuff, I was thinking of, you see a lot of what Jesus did in the Bible. But my brain, as I was learning, is like, what was he thinking about? What was his mindset? How did he handle all this stuff coming at him all the time? How was he so at ease and joyful? He's the most joyful person on earth.
Right.
While he's asking, how did he get to this point? And what it boils down to is he's so secure in who his father is and what his father thinks about him. That's it. That's where all of the peace that surpasses understanding comes from. And that verse that says, Jesus is the cornerstone.
Right.
I think about like, what was Jesus's cornerstone?
That's a good point. Yeah.
What his father thinks about him, who he knows his father to be.
Right.
That's what his rock was. So
you think about when Jesus, when his ministry is announced to the world with John the Baptist, right? I mean, the way God pronounces that is, this is my son.
Right.
Like he could have said, this is this is God on earth. This is, the Messiah to the nation of Israel. Like this is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, like any of those grandiose, great statements that could have been made that were all true, right? This is the beginning and the end, incarnate on earth. Like all of those things are true. This is a person who saw the earth formed. He was there and saw man created, and he has seen the end of the earth and the end of the age, and will participate in that, coming to just live among you. And the way God introduces that is, this is my son. And so, the thought of that was so important, that it was such a pillar of what God wanted people to know him as, a part of him as the son. I mean, it's just, to me, it's so that brings up probably, maybe the last question. So where's the church, like the modern church, just missed this? Because I feel like it has in a lot of ways. I feel like, and again, nothing against any specific church or denomination or whatever, but just if we talk about the modern church in general, it feels like this is a pretty big miss in general, because it's not something that I'd processed. Again, I knew Jesus. I was a Christian, right? Again, like you said, I would call myself a Christian since I was, 15, 16 years old, but never operated out of this freedom of sonship and knowing God in the way that I have until 3 years ago, until I was 44 years old. I mean, a ridiculous amount of time, really, for me. Now I look back on it and go, wasted time, right? But so where has like the modern church missed this, and why, frankly, in your opinion?
Yeah. to touch on the Father speaking to Jesus in the baptism, it's like Jesus is fully human. He's fully God, but as fully human, he needed the affirmation from the Father.
Right.
This is what I really think about you. I used to think that he was saying that stuff so that the people around him heard, but he was saying it to Jesus. And Jesus knew, and he could hold on to that no matter what happened the next 3 years. He could hold on to that moment. He knows that he had that experience. He knows what his Father thinks about him. That was the foundation of his ministry before he got sent out. Right. And then the Holy Spirit came upon him. So the first thing was the Father's love and the Father's affirmation. Bestowing
that identity to him.
Yes.
Like, this is who you are.
Yes. The concrete being poured into the foundation. That was the foundation. The Holy Spirit came upon him after that. So in that moment, the Father is saying, like you said, he's saying the priority. This matters. This is like the most important thing. Boom. So then, from my perspective, from like a game theory or like a game maker, war room generals, like looking down on the maps, scene, the enemy recognizes that when believers become sons and they start to live like a son and think like a son, they're dangerous, right? Because they're free, right? They're no longer scared of the things that all of his tactics of accusation and fear and whatever else he can get you with, they don't apply to sons. That does not go through. It does not speak louder than what the Father says about me. He's terrified of the believers becoming sons and daughters. That is what the enemy is most scared of. Right. So I believe throughout history, that is what he's poured more resources at is to stop people from becoming sons. Sure. And baked into God's restoration of all things, I believe God reveals things in certain times of history as an antidote and an answer to what's going on in the world. So we're at a place in history right now that's never happened before. It's more probably intense and unknown than it's ever been, where anything could happen. And I believe the verse I'm always telling people is Romans 8:19, which I might join a couple of translations here, but it's basically saying the whole earth stands on tiptoe, waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. So right there it says, when that was written, the sons and daughters of God had not been revealed yet. Right. I believe in my story that I am one of the sons that's being revealed. And that feels almost arrogant to say it. Sure. Good. But it isn't. Right. I believe that's the invitation for believers in this age. And I believe the sons and daughters are going to rise up and be the answer for whatever happens in the kingdom. So that's where I'm at. It's interesting. Yeah, it really is. As we've kind of unpacked that, and as I've gotten to know you more and accepted that, it's again, there's so much depth to that, and the process of becoming, right, is something that it's Morgan Snyder's kind of phrase that we've adopted in a lot of ways, right? Is that you're always learning, you're always trying to figure out what part of God and what part of myself can I dive into next, and sort of try to meld the two to get closer together, right? Because in the end, that's what we want is to become more like God and Jesus, and to continue to pick out parts of our life that we can combine with that. And sonship is a big one, where we can look at that and go, yeah, you know what? I need to embrace this, and I need to accept my identity as a son effectively, because that is the intent from creation forward. It's already true if you're a believer. Right. Yep. And yet we just haven't accepted that as truth or as reality or as our identity. Right. And as you do, the changes that it makes in you and the freedom that it gives you, then it opens up different areas that you can do. The fact that we're sitting here doing this, right? I know that knowing your story and where you came from, this is not something where you're like, you would have seen yourself doing 6 years ago, 7 years ago, right? Yeah, no, not part of who you saw yourself as. Right. Me, definitely not something that
that I saw myself, as doing as much as 3-4 years ago. Right. And so, the fact that we're able to do this is a part of our process of becoming and moving forward in what God has for us and what he's doing in us. Mm-hmm. And so you don't know where it's going to take you effectively,
right?
And what the next step is, or what the next wound to be exposed is, or, trial to walk through. I mean, sometimes it's not just, we're not born of, silver spoon in our mouth.
Right.
It's that, God's going to lead us through that though. And so even in those hard times, as much as sometimes it feels like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Just knowing that you are is enough sometimes. And sometimes that's what you have to hang it on is I know I'm going to get through this. So I'm just going to sit in that.
Yep.
And that is being a son, because your father is going to lead you through it one way or another.
There's a healthy tension at the beginning where you're like, I'm just putting my faith out there. I don't get it. It doesn't feel real. I'm just going to choose it. Mm-hmm. You just sit there in this tension and things are hard. We had twins right in the middle of COVID, and I'm in the middle of this process, and it's all this tension. It's not like, it's just like, what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And so I was the Lord is so gracious that he helped me start this process 2 years before that. So by the time I came here, I was at least processing information better, more as a son than I was before. Mm-hmm. That's the whole thing. It's like we have the mind of Christ. We have access to it. But what is the mind of Christ? It's the mind of a son.
Right.
So it's how you process information is the key to life on earth. Mm-hmm. And we can process information like Jesus processes information, and that's as a son.
Right.
So
good. So good. Well, this has been good. It's been great talking to you. I know, we have a lot of conversations. We haven't lately had a lot of time to sit down and talk. So to record the conversation's a little bit different, right, than our normal, but it's been really good talking to you. From me to you, having you introduced into my life and God bringing you into my life has just been it really is something that has challenged me in a lot of ways to look at things differently and to process differently. And a lot of times as I'm, walking through this path, which again has been not always easiest, right? Mm-hmm. The voice that I hear a lot of times is some of the conversations that we've had and some of the affirmations from interactions that we've had that just kind of is like, hey, remember who you are, really. And that's my Mick voice in my head is just remember who you are. And I think that when, from me to you, that's something that I feel like you have bestowed on a lot of men. Wow. Is that voice that just says, hey, remember who you are, right? Remember who you are that God says you are, not who the world says you are, or sometimes even you think that you are, or the people in your life say that you are, but remember who you really are. And that allows me personally to recenter a lot of times and to have that moment of reflection with God to go, okay, who am I, God? Again, continue to build in me that and continue to build in me. As I was going through some hard times, in my life in the last couple of years, that question that you said, God, what do you have for me right now? What do you have for me next has been like a lifesaver for me. Wow. Because at times that's all I've had is, hey, God, please, what can we do right now? Right. You and me, I need you like right now to be part of my life. And it's been all that I've had in some days. And so it's just, I just wanted to acknowledge you in that and just to kind of maybe continue to, maybe to encourage you to understand that the impact that you're having goes well beyond any impact that you see as you've been walking through this. And there's a lot of things that you do. I mean, the things that you do for man to man and for organizing a lot of the things that we do and the connections and stuff that you make, that's all invaluable as well. But that connection that you make with leading people into this area of sonship. That's stuff that maybe you don't see and that you don't hear on an everyday basis. But I wanted you to hear that from me because it has been just a big part of my life and coming through this. I also, you gave me that book on sonship, and I did the same thing. I actually lost it. I don't know if I told you that, but I put it aside. And then at one point I said, I think I want to read that book finally. And I couldn't find it. Like, that's how much God was not now. Right. Like, this is not now for you. Yeah. And then just out of nowhere, I mean, obviously not out of nowhere, obviously God, I always feel funny when I even say stuff like that, right? Like, out of nowhere, like, God's made a mistake and dropped it all of a sudden. But, it seemed like out of nowhere to me. Right. Suddenly this book resurfaced again, and I found it and I read it, and I was ready for it. Yeah. I was ready to hear what it had to say and to hear. It was not an introduction to something new. Right. It was a revelation into where I was and then how to continue. And so it touched me too. It was really good. But
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that.
All right. Man.
And I had just one little encouragement to people as you go through this. And this is something that kind of caught me off guard as I've gone. But as you start to receive the truth about what God really thinks about you, you start to see the truth of what God really thinks about others. Mm. And then you can almost start this process of, God, what do you think about them? You come across people that are annoying you or frustrating. And I've trained myself to be like, all right, God, I can't stand that person. What do you like about them? How'd you make them? Right. And you just have this new conversation, and you suddenly start to get thoughts and ideas and ways that the Lord has spoken to you that make sense for them. And you're able to just become this free-flowing encouragement person everywhere you go.
That's good.
And you're just adding value to people. Like what you're saying, it's not job related, or it's like I'm adding real value in the form of encouragement or hope to someone else. So the Lord wants to share his heart with others to you in the form to bring encouragement and hope to the world around you.
And continue to expand it, right? I mean, I think that's what you're moving it forward. You're moving the kingdom forward.
Yeah. And it hits way deeper than doing a business transaction or some big deal or something, some accolade. It's like when you help, like what you just told me, like if I shared something out of my story to you, you applied it to your life, and then your life was improved by that. That is like the new currency for me. Like it's so satisfying, so deeply amazing that you're able to be a part of what God is doing in your life. Mm-hmm. It's deeply satisfying and awesome.
Right. Well, so, I think that wraps it up for us. Okay. And so, I think that to kind of put a challenge out there is to invite guys to explore this and to process this and to, begin to unpack this in their life and begin to, just sit down and, to get, where's the place that they start? I think that question that you asked in the beginning is maybe the place to start for guys.
Yeah, that's probably a catch-all, which is just, Lord, I'm here. I'm going to surrender my own understanding, and I'm going to say, I want what you want. What do you want to work on in my heart or my mind next? Perfect. I think he'll lead each of you where he wants to take you.
Start there. All right. Yeah. Good.